Hello, my name is Florian Nuţă, professor at Danubius University in Romania, and I'm going to discuss today about sustainable development options and the pathways from pollution heavens to green development. The premises for discussing this topic is that, as previously confirmed by many studies that were dealing with environmental Kuznets curve, environmental quality improves after a certain development threshold. That means that until that threshold, national economies are damaging the ecological environment to obtain economic output, to tackle their social and economical issues without taking really seriously into account the environmental quality, the ecological footprint, and so on. The reasons for passing from environmental damage to environmental improvement after that development threshold is that development, social and economical development, it's coming with technological progress, industrial diversification, and development of tertiary sector, better education, better public utilities and services, improved regulatory system, and others. All these features that are common to a developed society were find that are improving the environmental quality also. Altogether, the citizens living in a developed society are getting a new behavior regarding the environmental quality, and it was discovered in previous research that they are more inclined to behave, let's say, in a greener way. For discussing the pollution heaven, we have to know that industrial operations that become obsolete for developed economies represent a progress in terms of economic activity for less developed economies. That means that those economies that are not yet sufficiently developed will seek external foreign resources and foreign economic capacities to develop. Under these circumstances, those industrial capacities that are not really the last technology in developed economies will be enough for these less developed countries for their economic needs. So all the economic development gaps between the developed countries and less developed countries, and the need for increasing the economic output for the last category of countries are the main drivers for moving energy and pollution intensive operations between them. In other words, all the less developed countries will embrace these obsolete industrial capacities that are highly energy intensive and highly pollution and carbon emissions industrial capacities for their needs to develop and to recover the development gaps. Of course, along with these production capacities, the developed economies will also exporting environmental degradation, energy intensity, and pollution. The literature is also recognizing this phenomena under the name of environmental unequal exchange theory, which was developed by Hornborg in 1998. The main idea of this theory is that the richer north, the theory splits the world in two: the rich and developed north, and the poor and underdeveloped south. So under this theory, the richer part of the world will export pollution and highly intensive industries in poor countries and less developed countries, and will get from these countries natural raw resources on low rents, and will get economic output at a lesser price and costs than they could produce in their own countries. But getting back to the pollution heaven hypothesis, this is a theory discussing how emerging economies, environment, is affected by the relocation of industrial capital from developed economies. So companies will always seek for profits and for bigger economic output compared with the efforts and the input. So in their seek for these profits, will seek to relocate their industrial operations from developed countries to regions with less strict environmental regulatory system, usually in less developed regions. Of course, this is a pragmatic view of the economic system, and it is nothing bad in doing this, because this is the main reason for private companies to exist, to produce profits for the capital owners. And at the same time, the less developed countries will embrace such industrial operations, also for a pragmatic reason, because they need to develop. They need to deal with unemployment. They need to mitigate their social inequalities, economic poverty, and so on. And the foreign direct investment resources coming with these companies, relocated companies, is the one of the instruments to do this. But this industrial relocation will add environmental degradation and pollution to the host countries during the whole process. The existence of environmental regulation gaps between highly regulated developed and low regulated developing economies will give the second category of countries the pollution heaven status, and an opportunity to use this status as a competitive advantage in attracting the dirty industries. It may seem as something unnatural to say about this pollution heaven status as being an opportunity or a competitive advantage. But is the truth, and in a global market where there are no borders for capital relocation and industrial activity operations is something that happens, and it happens on a win-win basis, because as I said, the companies relocating their old industrial capacities will see to extend the lifespan of these industrial capacities and further produce economic output with them. And at the same time, the national bodies and governments and communities will use these relocated industrial capacities to employ the human resources to extend the opportunities for getting revenues and to develop and invest the outputs in developing the society. Globalization is seen by many as the basis for the existence of such phenomena and such operations, because previous studies confirm that trade liberalization brings pollution-intensive industries and environmental damage to emerging economies, building the premises for the pollution heaven hypothesis confirmation. Of course, additionally, when a national economy is performing on the global market, may use its various competitive advantages to attract foreign direct investments. And it's natural to do this when less strict environmental protection standards or low natural resources exploitation rents are two such advantages that affects ecological quality in the host country or region. In a recent paper entitled Environmental Impact of Globalization, the Case of Central and Eastern European Emerging Economies, I've discussed and dealt with the impact of globalization on the environmental quality and the addition of carbon emission that globalization and the international relationships under the global market circumstances will bring to different kind of countries. The main findings of this recent paper are as follows. Economic complexity exerts a moderating effect in reducing the environmental pressure proceeding from globalization. That means that, of course, the globalization may be a premises for more carbon emissions, more pollution, more biodiversity loss, and finally a lower level of environmental quality. However, if the industrial structure and the economic system of the national economy reach a certain economic complexity threshold, this economic complexity will moderate the effect of global relations by reducing the environmental degradation brought by it. It is quite clear and natural to see that way the things, because economic complexity means that tertiary industrial sector is more developed, Technological advancements are more involved in economic activity, and they are implemented better by companies. And if we are talking about technological advancements, we'll talk about energy efficiency, less energy involved in economic activities, renewable sources, and so on. Another major result of this paper was that pollution heaven hypothesis is validated at early stages of development. Of course, many countries were at the time a pollution heaven, because there are asymmetries of in terms of development between regions, between countries on the same continent, and if all the countries are entering the common market, the same market, some of them will be potential pollution heavens. And a third result was that globalization affects environmental well-being in relatively less polluted economies. This is quite an interesting result, because we are talking about countries that maybe they are not environmentally pristine, but during their early development stages were not such highly pollution or energy intensive. Maybe because the level of development and the level of industrial development was low. But trying to develop, trying to invest in better public services, in better infrastructure, for example, they would need financial resources. And based on their actual economic and industrial development, the resources needed for such objectives were low. So they seek for other sources, in external sources, but as I told you earlier, these external sources came with an addition of pollution, of natural resources intensive exploitation, and so on. So it is quite easy to understand why globalization will affect these relatively less polluted economies in their search for development and for extending their economic output and their financial resources for development. The general graphic explanation of this relationship between the variables included in the study is presented here. So we can see that the main driver for an addition of carbon emissions was the globalization, but at the same time, under the influence of the economic complexity, this globalization process is less intensive. And also, if we are introducing into discussion the renewable energy sources, will further diminish the carbon emissions and improve the environmental quality. It has to be said that the study presented comprises a selection of Eastern European economies, and the findings confirm that in their search for foreign resources meant to develop the economy and recover the structural gaps, they used less strict environmental regulations to attract such resources, becoming at early stages of development pollution havens. It has to be said that the Eastern European economies, in their vast majority, were ex-communist countries, exiting a highly centralized system and entering at the beginning of the 90s on the global market, on a free market, exerting their competitive advantages, which were mainly related to less strict regulation, important resources, natural resources, and somehow structural and institutional weaknesses at the beginning of their development as free market economies and emerging economies. So using all these competitive advantages, they attracted foreign direct investments and foreign financial resources, but at the same time, they intensified the natural resources exploitation and added more pollution and carbon emissions and biodiversity loss to the whole picture. Of course, after a certain development threshold, these countries adapted to the new circumstances and implemented higher environmental protection standards and increased the attention on raw resources exploitation. Of course, the communities in these countries developed along the roads and also changed their behaviors and became more interested in the natural environment and asked from their governments and local authorities to be more conservative in terms of ecological protection. Of course, there are still a lot of steps to be done in this regard, and all these countries are embracing the new sustainable development targets and the fight against climate change and the transition towards more renewable energy sources and so on. But they are now in the club. They somehow recovered some of the structural gaps, but still there is much to be done in this direction. Under these circumstances and having the results in our minds, the main measures to be done further were as follows. Implementation of stricter environmental protection standards, improving the energy intensity and energy mix by adopting new technologies and extending the share of renewable sources of energy. As a parenthesis here, of course, the energy mix must be changed by increasing the share of renewable sources, but at the same time is as much as important to improve the energy efficiency, because it is clear for everybody now that we cannot phase out coal or fossil fuels overnight. So the transition towards 100% renewable sources of energy will be done along several years, maybe decades. But during this transition period, we have to adopt new technologies, more green technologies that will increase the energy efficiency and will decrease the energy intensity for the economic output, and also for the households activities. As I said in the new item, in the next item here, investing in innovation and green options is a political tool for both economic activities, but also for households. Also, another measure would be improving the industrial structure by increasing the share of tertiary sector in the national economic output. As we saw earlier in the graphical representation of the results, economic complexity is very important for the national economy, and the transition towards a greener way to develop the society it's very important to be related to this economic complexity and other variables presented there, such as renewable energy or technological advancements. And last but not least, for sure, is to increase the value added from raw materials exploitation. For many years, these emerging economies, these pollution havens, were exporting their raw materials abroad because it was an incapacity to exploit internally these raw materials and add value to the final products. So for many years, the depletion of natural resources was something very bad for these countries, but it was related to their incapacity to do more, to obtain more from the exploitation of natural resources. And now, after several decades of development, the economic capacities and industrial operations should be available and should be enough developed to obtain more from these raw materials, and not only from new raw materials exploited internally, but also from implementation of circular economy principles. That means not only exploit new resources, but also include in the economic process old, used materials and raw materials by recycling, by reutilization, and so on. The concluding remarks, of course, must be connected with the results and the way emerging economies should pass from their status of pollution havens to green pathways and sustainable development targets. The main tools, main instruments for doing this is implementing new technologies, green technologies, extending the share of renewable sources of energy in their energy mix, and of course eliminating all the inequalities in society by extending the goods obtained internally and externally for the benefit of the communities. It has to be said that climate change is affecting everybody, is affecting the whole world, but it was discovered and evidence were found that even more affected are these less developed countries and communities. So judging by all these asymmetries that still exist in the world, we have to extend the knowledge and learn from past experience, and not transforming further poor communities or less developed regions in pollution heavens. We have to find ways to eliminate this way of thinking and this unsustainable development patterns, and of course put together all the resources at the benefit of the whole world, because there is only one world we are all living in, and cross-border pollution and climate change effects will affect the whole global population. Thank you for your attention. Of course, you can follow me and you can send me notes, comments, and ask me by email all you want to know about my research. Thank you.